Good evening, everybody. And on behalf of the Custom House Studios here and the Rolling Sun Festival 2015, which is kicking off officially tomorrow night, but this is a kind of a taster. I'd like to welcome you all this evening on a bad night, and it's great to see such a good turnout on a bad night. For the launch of this book, Western Ways, Remembering Mayo Through the Eyes of Helen Hooker and Ernie O Malley. Ernie O Malley and his memory is, some of you are aware, is a very important historical influence along the coast from Westport all the way out to Achill in the mid-20th century. So just before we start, I'd like to thank our funders here this evening in the Custom House Pobble, Mayo County Council, the Arts Council of Ireland, and the Rolling Sun Festival as well. So our guest speaker this evening is Michael Gibbons. Michael is a well-known archaeologist. He's from Clifton. He's a graduate of Galway University in History and Archaeology. He has a varied career in heritage and cultural history and archaeology, including at the Department of Antiques in Jerusalem and at the Museum of London City in their excavation programs. He also has worked with the Office of Public Works, and he's done work along the west coast, including excavations here locally at Croagh and on the various islands, Cahir Islands and McDarrow's Island in Connemara and Skellig Michael down off Kerry. He has an interest in tourism and heritage and history in tourism. So please welcome from Clifton, Michael Gibbons.
Good evening, Mahogany. It's a daunting place to come to Mayo as a Connemara man. So interloper from across the bay, and of course from across into enemy territory, the Conmacna, Mara, was the O'Flaherty country, occasionally allies of the O'Malleys, but often age-old enemies. And I see one of the photographs in the book is off Inishmoffin Island. The O'Malleys still laying claim to an island they captured in 1340s off the O'Flahertys, but granted back to Galway in 1872, and it features in this publication. So the O'Malleys are still looking to the west to grab that beautiful island back. And it's a great pleasure to be here. I've worked on many of these places, this magnificent landscape. I've recently been working on Inishlora, associated with St. Brendan, of course. And the boat that brought Ernie O Malley around Clew Bay, beautiful bay, was called St. Brendan. If you wonder, why did he pick St. Brendan? What was the big deal about St. Brendan? Well, St. Brendan is the holy well in Killeen, the ancient monastic site on the north shore of Clew Bay, very close to where Ernie and his wife Helen lived in Burrishrue Lodge. It's a beautiful little cemetery on the water's edge with an intertidal zone holy well. And St. Brendan the Navigator, who sailed the west of Ireland, and his sites and monasteries are scattered from here as far as Brandonvik on the Faroe Islands. That was the name of his boat, and this book is a remarkable achievement. Looking through it is very funny, because one of the sites in it was a site I thought I had discovered in one of the most beautiful photographs in Shannafarachan. It's the standing stone overlooking Loch na Fui. It's the very southern tip of County Mayo. And that standing stone was first documented by Helen Hooker and Ernie O Malley. So it's a very insightful book in terms of what's in the book, what's not in the book, what it tells us about their attitudes to the Irish landscape, what they perceived as important or significant. There are major gaps in it. Ernie O Malley was a townie from Castlebar, an urbanite growing up in a middle class home. The images that come through this book are a completely different landscape to that. The landscape probably he's not from, but he's visiting. He's part of it, but he's not in it. And of course it's a landscape of a person coming back to Ireland, having gone through the turbulent world of foundation of the state, the sourness and bitterness that emerged after coming out of the Civil War and coming back into it, having the experience and the distance, having living in America and marrying an American. So he's reflecting on that landscape through new eyes, the eyes not of an insider from Castlebar, but as a partially an outsider. So there's a part of an outsider's view in this. Outsider through his wife, of course, who's American, and also him now having that distance from a landscape. And of course, when you go away and travel and being abroad, it brings into sharp focus the landscape you have and you're brought up with. And you see things perhaps that he never saw as a young boy as he travelled through Mayo. So this book is hugely important, not just in the collection, but it's in the images of Ireland, a lost Ireland in many ways. An Ireland that has changed, the landscape has changed, not dramatically in many cases. The vernacular history, the houses, settlement ways have changed. People haven't changed, thankfully. The warmth that you can see in the eyes of these wonderful children, this beautiful portrait of the children, the children from Clare Island. That lovely, lovely photograph here, one of the most beautiful of the teenagers looking up fondly at someone they're comfortable with before. That is a beautiful photograph of teenage years before the difficult years of leaving the island or getting married. They're still in the excitement. A wonderful, warm, loving photograph. I'll talk a little bit later about the photographs. I grew up in a household where my father came home once a year. And why is that important? Well, we got to see Mayo once a year. My father would come back with a hired car driving from Clifton up through Leland, up into the big mountains. The first monument I ever recognised, being shown to as a young lad, 9 or 10, was the Old Thor Wedge tomb down at Craig on Boy, at the opening of that magnificent valley going down into Dulac Valley. So there's all sorts of aspects of the Irish landscape embedded in this book, from the distant past of Bronze Age tombs. You have the fantastic site up on the northwest coast of Downpatrick Head. Patrick, of course, stood at this landscape with monasteries. And you have the beautiful photograph of the Bronze Age sites at Killadangan, underneath the magnificent holy mountain of Kilpatrick, which, as a teenage boy I climbed for the first time on the last night pilgrimage. There are other sort of sites in it. You can see, whether it's consciously or not, the wish to be part of the O'Malley strain. The O'Malleys, all powerful on land and sea. The wonderful images of the medieval castles. The O'Flaherty texts, they're beautiful islands, extraordinary photographs of ordinary things. The regatta on Clare Island, some really powerful images. The families on Clare Island, enjoying them. So he's capturing images of rural Ireland, not looking bleak and dark, but looking happy and not comfortable, because this was still an impoverished Ireland when they were in it. But people contented and in a way comfortable. They're not comfortably off, but they're comfortable in their surroundings. And then you get the other images on it. You have this amazing images, the white quartz stones, which are picked out. Well, those white quartz, you'll still see them if you go to Tarman in Belmullet, an amazing monastery, where the whole series of graves there are lined with white quartz pebbles. Killeen Graveyard, if you were there a number of years ago, lined with white quartz pebbles. Inishboffin Island, which features beautiful photographing in the book. The graves, the early Christian graves associated with St. Coleman's Abbey, one of those table tombs is still, as is documented in the book here, has a whole series of white quartz pebbles. A symbol of hope for eternal life, hope of redemption, innocence. Mullad Lass in North Connemara. You have one little children's grave there, and they're all lined with white quartz pebbles. And if you go to the Inishkay Islands, of course, which I've been recently, and Inishglora in particular, associated with St. Brendan, you have the graves there lined with white quartz pebbles. They're picking up aspects of the landscape, both the ancient, the medieval, the modern, the contemporary landscapes are captured in this book. Things that are not captured in this book: the townies of Castlebar aren't in it. The people of Westport aren't in it. The people of Louisburg aren't in it. One shot Market Day in Newport close to home, close to that lovely lodge that they lived in. Lean Ann, how could he have driven by Lean Ann and not photographed it? Where my grandfather was born. So it's a very conscious look at a landscape which he's seeing as a townie, but he's coming back as someone who's absorbed now with the rural landscape. He's also absorbed with the coastal landscape. The O'Malley heritage is tugging at them. And it's clear from the photographs that these are no ordinary photographers. Helen, we don't know who took the photographs, which of them taken them, but certainly there's some of them. These are artists at work. This photograph of the Chianti, the thatched roof, and the tying down of the thatch. I forget now, it's on the wall there behind you. This set of photographs here, I mean, the photographs are works of art. The small farm skills are works of art. Of course, it's an art that's now a distant memory. It was still there when I was a young fella, all over Connemara. It was still there in the 1960s into the 1970s. These traditional houses, of course, were swept away when people wanted indoor toilets and bathrooms in the whole modern world. But look at that for a photograph of just somebody capturing a moment in time of an ordinary thing, but the skill that went into making these thatch roofs. And this whole series, they were fascinated with the vernacular architecture. These small, snug farms and homes tucked into drumlin ridges on high mountains, overlooking the sea, overlooking the Atlantic. This is one picture after the other. Lovely one here, the wheelwright at work. My grandfather was wheelwright. He could make dressers, he could make carts, he could make any little thing. But that's an ancient craft, of course. They're now gone. So there are really extraordinary things in it. What's really wonderful about it, Christy came into my life a number of years ago. And of course, I've been looking at travelogues. I've been studying travelogues for a long time. Because in the 17th century and in the 18th century, and in particular because of the Civil War, we have a dearth in certain areas of historical sources. Many of our sources are lost, thanks to the Civil War that Ernie so documented. He himself, of course, having come through the Civil War, not embittered by it, but he records the experiences of many of the men who fought in it. My own grandfather came back from America. He was 14 years in Butte, Montana. We knew nothing about Dublin. We knew everything about America. America was close to us growing up, whereas Dublin was a distant country, like another place altogether. But everywhere, America seemed to be close to us. So Ernie's journey in America was hugely productive. Culturally for him, of course, he met his wonderful, amazing woman. This woman was in Russia in 1928, in the middle of the vicious Stalin purges. She was in Greece, an amazing country where I lived in myself. She has travelled, she was a worldly travelled, cultured woman, and they hit it off, and they had raised a family in the hard years of the war years in Ireland. There was a site here, an amazing photograph, and it's this one here. Bring in the potatoes at Burrashrew Lodge. It's not of the lodge. There's one photograph of the shed at the lodge, but it's of men with a clamp of potatoes. A site I remember as a kid, but it's no longer there. I just wrote on it, Domech fatius monage, honage. If we'd potatoes and turf, we'd have life on our backside. So in this book, they're capturing that rural Irish society, and Christy comes in to me with these photographs, and she's firing up this photograph. Do I know where this is? What do I think of that one? And of course, it's like an Aladdin's cave of images. Because I've been collecting images, both pictorially and maps and cartographic references, going back to John Dunton's first foray into the West in 1698. He's coming at that stage to see the last of the wild, barbarous Irish in their uncivilized state. And he leaves this fantastic account of the mountains of Connemara. And all sorts of people travel through the West for all sorts of different agendas at various points in time. And of course, Helen Hooker, when she comes here, she's not the first American to travel these shores. Another extraordinary American was here in the 19th century, who left this amazing description of the very landscapes that are documented here. Her name, of course, which we should have a memorial to her, but we don't, was Asenath Nicholson, an evangelist who walks through the west of Ireland. She walks from Connemara, she climbs the Diamond, she climbs Kilpatrick, she's negotiating with the Girl Guides. They're charging too much, by the way. So she climbs Kilpatrick without them. She walks to Achill, which is documented in the beautiful imagery here on the wall. And she goes on and describes the horrific events in the Mulla Peninsula. So Asenath Nicholson documented Ireland of the pre-famine immediately, the famine years. She worked in the Central Leaf community. Helen Hooker, in her photographs and her really love of the landscape that comes out of this, documents Ireland in that really amazing time, the end of the 30s, into the 40s. A world that was all very familiar 40 years ago when we were kids, but it's no longer. Our children and grandchildren, this is a different world to them now. It's like almost prehistory in terms of landscape. So I would just like to commend the book to everyone here. It's an exceptional cross-section of farming, of sailing, of good days on regatta, of the race on Carramore Strand, saving hay, racing horses, and this amazing photograph, which I was fortunate to get out onto Island Moor Island. Now it's a beautiful photograph. It's what page is on? 71. I know those of you who've been on the islands at Clube. I haven't been on a lot of them. But if you go in there now, it's a different scene that you see. These islands have been people for thousands of years. And the islands have sadly, one by one, all along the Irish coast, been gradually abandoned. And this landscape, when you go into it now, most of those houses are overgrown, ivy covered. It's quite, and these are prosperous, rich little communities living on the edge of the tide. So after scouring these photographs, vernacular historians will get value in them. Archaeologists certainly will. There's stunning, look at this for a photograph of the prehistoric landscape. The stone row, aligned possibly on a niche in the rock where the sun sets on the 21st of December. A really beautiful site. It hasn't changed other than it's much more grazed at this point. So you have a cross-section of Irish society, of people, of individuals, of exceptional importance, this collection. And of course this is only a snapshot, a small snapshot of the photography collected by these two amazing people. The production is really beautiful. There's a wonderful preface by Cormac O'Malley, describes his life here. There's a description of and text to go with each photograph. Christy has researched it. She's consulted widely with a whole raft of scholars. And that's the great thing about scholarship, is people who are scholars, who do study, like nothing better than sharing their scholarship with other scholars. So Christy, who came to Ireland as a novice about Irish landscape, not as a historian, but as someone fresh off the mark, what a wonderful achievement she has now gifted to the people of Mayo and the people of the west of Ireland, and not just the people of Ireland, because this book is important right across the country in terms of the images that it captures of a lost world. So, Gurmil Mahagi, thank you very much.